Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to talk about the Booker Prize 2020 shortlist. And right away, let's get to the big news. What happened? Hilary Mantel's The Mirror and the Light did not make the shortlist, which feels a little bit mind-blowing. And I know, in a way, Hilary Mantel is fine. She even said that it wouldn't be the end of the world if she didn't make the shortlist because she has gotten recognition. She's an established author. Like, it's fine. But it just feels very surprising that this did not make the shortlist. I think all of the predictions that I had seen really thought that there was a spot secured for The Mirror and the Light, which, by the way, if you're unfamiliar, is the concluding volume of the trilogy of books Hilary Mantel wrote about Thomas Cromwell. Part of why this is so shocking is that both of the previous installments won the Booker Prize. Had Hilary Mantel won a third, it would have been historic. I don't think she was going to win. I think if she had made the shortlist, depending on the books that made the list with her, she'd have had a shot. But it's a very steep road to get that third Booker. But still, it felt like there was a spot reserved for her in the shortlist. And no, apparently there is not. So we have to say goodbye to Hilary Mantel's The Mirror and the Light, which again, it feels mind-blowing. And I think it's easy after what happened last year for us all to have thought that there was a narrative being created to allow Hilary Mantel either to win or to make it to the shortlist, because that is what happened last year with Margaret Atwood's The Testaments. It felt like a forced narrative was created to push that book onto the long list and then onto the shortlist, and then it couldn't even be given up at the time when the time came to declare a winner, because it ended up tying with Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other, even though there were 5 people on the jury, so there's no way they could have deadlocked, but mathematically speaking. So it's easy in the wake of that for people to assume that a narrative would be created to put this book into the mix. And when it made the long list, most of the reactions that mentioned this book, at least on my channel, seemed to be that the jury was stacking the deck for Hilary Mantel. I don't think they were doing that. Well, clearly they weren't, because it didn't make the shortlist. But it's easy to believe that, given what happened last year. But this is a very interesting development that I don't think a lot of people saw coming. I'm still very interested in reading The Mirror and the Light. I have not gotten around to it yet. I have read the first 2 volumes. But yeah, I think this is far and away the biggest takeaway in a reaction right now, because it's shocking that this did not make the list. So what did make the list? I'm going to keep my coffee close, if you don't mind. The New Wilderness by Diane Cook, This Mournable Body by Tsitsi Dangarembga, Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi, The Shadow King by Maaza Mengiste, Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stuart, and Real Life by Brandon Taylor. That's our shortlist. Those are the 6 books that are vying to win the Booker Prize 2020. Really quickly, just some demographics. There are 4 authors of color on the shortlist, which makes this the most diverse shortlist ever. There are 4 debut novelists: Brandon Taylor, Douglas Stewart, Diane Cook, and Avni Doshi. And all but 1 finalist is either American or holds joint U.S. citizenship. And the one outlier on that is Tsitsi Dangarembga, who is from Zimbabwe, I believe, and still lives there. So, as an American, I feel like I can't wade into the discussion about whether or not it's a travesty that the Booker Prize opened itself to include American authors. It used to be closed to any American author and just focus on English language novels published elsewhere. They opened it up, and there has been a lot of discussion and a little bit of controversy ever since. I think there have been only 2 American winners, but there have been a fair amount of longlisted and shortlisted American authors, and there are a lot of people who believe that, America has the Pulitzer Prize, which is only for an American author, so it seems only fair. Again, as an American, I feel like I can't quite weigh in, because anything I say, it seems, I don't know, it's not my conversation to have. So even though I just said that I don't feel like I should really be the person to comment, I guess what I would say is that I do like the idea of having an award that is for any English language book. no matter where it comes from. I like that because the Pulitzer is specifically American. The Nobel Prize is for a body of work, not a single title. So I do like the idea that there is at least one prize that will consider people no matter where they are in the world, as long as their book is published in English first. But I would like to see in the future a little bit more diversity. And that's why I like the idea that even though 5 out of the 6 novelists that are on this shortlist are either American or have joint U.S. citizenship, I like how diverse this is, and I think that's a good thing. Let's do a bit more of a deep dive into each of the titles. The first one is The New Wilderness by Diane Cook. I'm going alphabetically by author. I do not own a copy of this one. The New Wilderness is a dystopian novel about a mother trying to keep her daughter safe in the wake of environmental disaster. It has been described by the Washington Post as accidentally timely, but also timeless. In it, a mother desperate to save her ailing daughter volunteers them to live in the wilderness state, which is an experimental wildlife area trying to see if humans can coexist with nature. It's timely and political in that it deals with climate change and overpopulation, but it does so through the human story of a mother trying to avoid losing her daughter, only to see her daughter grow away from her, which is what happens with parenthood. So it's tackling the big ideas of climate change and environmental disaster and overpopulation through a relatable human story of someone trying to hold their daughter close, but their daughter's growing up and away from them, which is kind of interesting. I confess I'm not too interested in reading it. This is one of this and I think Love and the Other Thought Experiments were the 2 books on the long list that I just was not really interested in. There is potential for this one, and depending on how people talk about it as we get closer to the announcement of the winner, maybe I will end up being interested, because like I said, I do like that it is getting at those themes through the lens of something relatable, but I'm just not sure about it. So it's going to take a little convincing for me to warm up to the idea of reading The New Wilderness by Diane Cook. Next is one that I do own, This Mournable Body by Tsitsi Dangarembga. The glare is probably not very helpful for you to see this cover, but I'm going to hold it up anyway. This is the 3rd volume in a series that began with 1988's novel Nervous Conditions. This Mournable Body follows a woman in post-colonial Zimbabwe as she tries to make a life for herself. Dangarembga was arrested protesting government corruption, and I believe is due in court this week about that. So she is a big political figure and an activist, and it's easy to see that a body, especially a body celebrating diversity like the Booker jury seems to be this year, would latch onto her. Nervous Conditions was also the first novel by a black woman in Zimbabwe to be written in English, and in 2018 it was named as one of the 100 books that have shaped the world by the BBC. And I think belated recognition of that book would also seem to maybe spill over to This Mournable Body, which is I don't know if it's the concluding chapter of a trilogy. I don't know enough about it for that. I did order myself a copy of Nervous Conditions, which I have on my shelf. I didn't pull it for this. I am very interested in reading this book. I've heard mixed things about it. There have been some wildly negative reactions to it. There have also been some positive reactions to it. I don't know that I've really heard anybody love this book. But I am personally interested in reading it, and I think it's easy to see how it made the shortlist. Will it win? Given the very mixed reaction to it so far, it feels like if this book does win, it's a bit more of a political statement than the book itself, or a reflection of the book itself. But I'm still interested in reading this book. This is one of the 2 books that I immediately made sure I got a copy of once the long list was announced. The 3rd book that I was probably most interested in, I already owned a copy of, or even I was really interested in The Mirror and the Light, and I owned a copy of that, but we'll talk about that more as we get through. So this is something I'm very interested in reading, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how the conversation continues around this book, especially since, as I said, I believe she is due in court this week, and it'll be interesting to see if developments in that area have larger ramifications on the contest as a whole. And then there is Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. If I were to make a wild prediction about the outcome of Booker 2020, which would be really irresponsible because I think we need a little bit more time before we really start making predictions. But if I were to make like a wild prediction today, I would say that with The Mirror and the Light out of the competition, Burnt Sugar is probably the front runner, and that is where I would put my money if I were going to bet today. I don't put money on things. I don't bet. I'm not a betting person. So, and like I said, I think we need to see how the conversation starts to shape over the course of the period between now and when the prize is announced before we can really make an informed prediction. But just wild guess would be Burnt Sugar as the front runner. I was initially hesitant about Burnt Sugar when the longlist was announced. It was one that I was not familiar with. I basically said that I was kind of interested but was going to wait for more information before committing to whether or not I was going to want to read it. I actually have now ordered a copy. I found on Blackwell's they are selling the book for roughly $10 US, and they are not charging for shipping. So I don't know if it will arrive anytime soon, but I did order it through there. So hopefully it is on its way. Don't know if I will get it in September or if it will probably more likely show up in October because it's free shipping. It'll get here when it gets here. So, but I did make sure I ordered a copy because it is not going to be available in the US until next year. Maybe if it does win, they will bump up the publication date, but as of right now, it is not available in the US until 2021. The feedback on this book has really intrigued me. It follows the toxic relationship between a mother and a daughter, and the betrayals, the shared memories, and the bonds that they share as a result of their relationship as the mother's health wanes and the daughter finds herself in the position of caring for a mother that has never really cared for her. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic. And it doesn't have like the big politics of the New Wilderness or this Mournable Body, but and some of the books that are still to come on the short list, but I do think it seems like a really great personal story, and the Booker certainly tends to enjoy those, although the jury is this year is very different from juries in the past, so who knows if that is something they will respond to ultimately. But from the conversation around it, it seems like a really great book, and I'm very much looking forward to reading it. Then we have The Shadow King by Maaza Mengiste. This is a book that I was also hesitant about when I looked at the long list, but which has not gotten a whole lot of additional feedback since then, so it's still kind of in limbo for me. I don't really know where I stand on it either way, and I think that's why this is one that I had not put on my prediction for the shortlist. But I'm really looking forward to more in-depth conversation about The Shadow King and finding out more about it and the potential quality of the book itself. It sounds like it could be interesting. It's set in 1935 during Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia. It follows a woman who finds herself sort of at the center of all the political turmoil and who, as in the mix of things as the situation steadily leads toward an uprising. So it is a fictional story based on a real historical event that honestly I did not really know much about as someone who was raised in the American educational system, where we don't learn about much in other countries, certainly not about uprisings in Ethiopia in 1935. So it is a chapter of history that I would be interested in learning more about. I'm just kind of waiting to hear more about the book before making an ultimate decision either way. And then there's Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stuart. He is one of the debut novelists on the list. This is the other book with this Mournable Body that I just kind of immediately wanted to make sure I got a copy of. It sounds like a very me book. As I said, Real Life, which we're going to get to, is something I had already owned. The Mirror and the Light is something I had already owned. But I immediately sought this book out, and it had been released in the US, and I grabbed a copy at one of my local independent stores. Set in 1980s Glasgow, Shuggie Bain is about a childhood spent dealing with addiction, political turmoil, specifically Thatcher's politics, and poverty, as well as a sort of coming-of-age story about a boy coming to terms with his sexuality. All of those things really interest me. And I've heard a bit of some mixed things, mostly positive, and a lot of the positives have been overwhelmingly so. I've heard that it's kind of a sad book, that it's kind of a familiar book, and perhaps a little too familiar, but I'm still very much looking forward to this book. And the positive feedback has me thinking that this could do well in the competition, but I don't know, especially when it does feel a little bit like the coming of age stories and the coming out stories have been done before. A lot of movies, plays, books have already kind of dealt with a lot of the problematic politics of the Thatcher era and the lasting ramifications of them. So there are elements of this that could be been there, done that, but I'm still very interested in reading it. And I think it could potentially do well, depending on how things shake out. And the final shortlisted title is Real Life by Brandon Taylor, which, as I said, I had already owned a copy of before the longlist came out, which there were only 2 that were in that boat, and one of those didn't make the shortlist. Mirror in the Light again. This is something I had actually really wanted to make sure I had got a copy of and talked about, because it was released as America was kind of going into lockdown, and I, in my head, was thinking that it would be a terrible shame if this book was overlooked because of everything going on in the news and because bookstores were closed. But it seems like at least this book is going to be okay, and that is, I think, a great thing. I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I am still very much looking forward to it. This is a campus novel and a coming-of-age novel about a black student in a predominantly white PhD program who faces both racism and homophobia and has to come to terms with himself and makes realizations about the people around him. It just sounds like a really great book, and again, it ticks a lot of my boxes. It's something I'm really interested in. And I think one of the things that I do like about it is that campus novels are not new, coming-of-age novels are not new, coming-out stories are not new, but there has not been too much of a spotlight on black queer stories, and this is that. So I very much appreciate that. And that completes the shortlist. As I said, if I had to make a prediction right now, I'd probably say Burnt Sugar. But I'd love to hear what you think. If you have wild, shoot the moon predictions, leave them in the comment section down below. Now, of course, and I mentioned that we say goodbye to Hilary Mantel with The Mirror and the Light. We also say goodbye to Gabriel Krauze's Who They Was, Kiley Reid's Such a Fun Age, Colum McCann's Apeirogon, Ann Tyler's Redhead by the Side of the Road, and C. Pam Zhang's How Much of These Hills is Gold. I'm not surprised Apeirogon did not make it. The book has some defenders, but by and large, everything I've heard about it is really mixed. It also has a bit of an own voices controversy, and Colum McCann himself is in a bit of a sticky situation, so I'm not surprised that for both the quality of the book and the politics around it, that it did not make the shortlist. I thought Who They Was would make the shortlist instead of The New Wilderness. In hindsight, I probably should have guessed that The New Wilderness would have been the one because of that weighty, timely political angle that The New Wilderness has. Hindsight, what are you going to do? I did not think Ann Tyler had too much of a shot to get on the shortlist, so I'm not really surprised by that. People really seem to dislike Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid. I will say, though, I have not read it, but I really appreciate the discourse that it has prompted about race and racism in America. So I confess, I'm a little sad to see it go, but I was not surprised that it did not make the shortlist. I think if you boiled it down to American novels about race in America, this Real Life seemed like the one that was more likely to get in, and sure enough, here we are. And then, like I said, I don't remember if I ended up predicting The Shadow King or How Much of These Hills is Gold. I think I may have said How Much of These Hills is Gold. I think that's what I had said. So, yeah, I am a little surprised that one didn't make it. I've heard mostly positive things about that book as well, and I would like to read that at some point. So, that is the Booker 2020 shortlist and the titles from the long list that did not make it. Some shocks, some pleasant surprises. I'd love to hear what you think, and you know what to do. Mention that in the comment section down below. I will link my reaction to the long list down below as well, just why not? And anyway, like I said, I would love to hear what you think about this, if there's any of these titles that you are excited about, if you're not excited about. And as always, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for that. And I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.